This is the Biological Resources Information Program for the Woodward Island Bridge Replacement Project, brought to you by Alluvian Biological Consulting. This training has 4 broad objectives. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be familiar with all 4 of these points. First, we're going to cover the definition and implications of take, and then we'll move on to what your responsibilities are if you encounter a regulated species. We'll have a brief introduction to the protected species associated with this project, and then we'll go over some general mitigation measures that need to be followed in order to prevent any incidents of take. So let's talk a little bit about take. Take is a very broadly defined term. California has a different definition for it than the federal government does, but they're both very similar. So for the federal definition, take means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. California's definition is to hunt, pursue, catch, capture, or kill, or attempt to do any such actions. They're very, very similar, and they both mean pretty much the same thing. Anything that constitutes harassment or more is going to qualify as take. And the reason that it's important for you to know what take is because take of listed or regulated species can carry some pretty hefty penalties. Criminal penalties can go as high as $50,000 and up to a year in jail time in some instances. And civil penalties can get almost as high as the criminal penalties financially. So it's incredibly important that you know what take is and you avoid take as much as you possibly can so you can avoid these penalties. So before I introduce you to some of these listed and regulated species that we might encounter on the project, the first thing we need to go over is what your responsibilities are if you see one of these species. First and foremost, do not touch or approach the listed or regulated species. Can't stress that enough. Second thing on the list, if the species is in the immediate project area and is at risk of being injured or killed, you need to stop work immediately. What needs to happen then is you need to notify the designated biologist or the biological monitor. If one of us isn't there, if the monitor is not present, you need to contact Alluvian Biological Consulting directly. The phone number is in each of your books, and it's here on the presentation. The principal biologist on this project is Gennaro Lockhart. Only a qualified and permitted biologist can handle and move regulated species from the project site. This is a complete list of special status species that may occur on or near the project site. As you can see, there are quite a few of them. About half carry some sort of federal protection, and all of them carry some form of state protection. So now let's look at the listed and regulated species that may occur on or near the project site. Northwestern pond turtle is a medium-sized turtle. The color ranges anywhere between brown to olive brown to blackish, and the shell is going to be anywhere between 3.5 to 8.5 inches long. The species can be identified from the lines and spots that radiate from the center of the scutes, and the scutes are the bony plates that make up the shell of this animal. Males of this species tend to have a light throat and no markings, and a relatively flat shell, and females are going to have dark markings around their throat and have a noticeably taller shell. The species typically inhabits ponds and creeks and hibernates underwater for several months during the winter. Western pond turtles reach breeding age at about 8 to 10 years of age. Breeding usually takes place in April and May, and what females will do is they'll climb onto land on the water margin and dig a nest. They'll lay a clutch of around 2 to 11 eggs, and those eggs will gestate for about 80 to 100 days before they'll hatch. Giant garter snakes, true to their name, are the largest species of garter snakes, with adults measuring 36 to 65 inches long. Individuals usually range in color from brown to olive to black, but all typically exhibit a dorsal yellow stripe that runs down the length of their body, as well as a lighter yellow stripe on each side of their body. Their underbelly is typically gray to brown in color, And this species is highly aquatic, preferring marshes, drainage canals, rice fields, and other wetland habitat to hunt and take refuge. They eat primarily fish, tadpoles, and frogs, and the breeding season for this species is approximately 2 months, usually between March and April. Females give birth to live young, which can be anywhere between 10 to 46 young per brood, and this usually takes place in July through September. Giant garter snakes go dormant during the winter season, usually using an animal burrow to take refuge until the following spring. Chinook salmon is the largest species of salmon found in the United States. Apart from their size, adults can be identified by the black spots on their back, as well as on their dorsal, adipose, and tail fins. The gums are usually dark at the base of the teeth, and breeding individuals range in color between olive brown to purple. Chinook salmon are anadromous, which means they're born in fresh water, then migrate to the ocean, and then return as mature adults to freshwater to their natal streams to spawn. Breeding adults die shortly after spawning, but eggs are deposited within coarse gravel in streams and fast-flowing water. And depending on the water temperature, eggs may hatch after 90 to 150 days. Young fry will remain up to 2 years in streams before migrating to the ocean to complete the majority of their growth. Steelhead is another Pacific salmon species, with adults ranging in size from 19 to 33 inches in length. The breeding coloration of this species will look very similar to that of the Chinook salmon. However, steelhead are A, noticeably slimmer than Chinook salmon, and B, will not develop that hooked beak that Chinook salmon develop as they start to breed in the channels. Steelhead are anadromous, which means they're born in freshwater, they'll migrate to the ocean to complete the majority of their growth, and then they'll return to their natal stream to spawn. In the case of steelhead salmon, not all adults will die after spawning. In fact, 9% of adults will survive to spawn again. Eggs are deposited within gravel beds in streams with fast-flowing water, and depending on the water temperature, eggs hatch after 21 to 28 days. The fry are going to remain and develop in streams and lakes for about 3 years before migrating out to the ocean to complete their growth cycle. And a fun fact here, steelhead are genetically identical to rainbow trout. The only difference between steelhead and rainbow trout is that rainbow trout, instead of migrating out to the ocean to complete their growth, they're going to remain in freshwater their entire lives. Green sturgeon are large, distinctively shaped freshwater fish, and they can reach up to 2 meters in length. Individuals bear many features typical of other sturgeon species, including a shark-like tail, lines of bony plates that run down the length of their body, and a subterminal mouth that's surrounded by barbels. Green sturgeons can be distinguished from their co-occurring relatives, like white sturgeon, by their olive green coloration and their elongated and shovel-like snout. Green sturgeon, like many salmon species, are anadromous, spending most of their life in the ocean, but returning to freshwater habitats to spawn. Adults can live for over 25 years, and they feed mainly on bottom-feeding shrimp as well as lancets. Delta smelt is a small, slender-bodied fish measuring 6 to 12 centimeters in length. This species is endemic to California and only occurs in the San Francisco Bay estuary system. They feed primarily on plankton such as copepods and rotifers. The delta smelt life cycle follows the 4 seasons. In spring, they spawn in fresh water, and in summer they migrate and rear in low salinity zones of the estuary. In fall, individuals mature in the low salinity zones, and in winter, they migrate upstream shortly before they start to spawn. Individuals lay adhesive eggs, and they release them in batches over firm substrate or sand. Spawning usually takes place in February to July, and females can lay between 1,200 and 2,600 eggs depending on their body size. Eggs usually hatch in about 9 to 13 days, and the emergent larvae begin feeding on rotifers and minuscule prey in about 4 to 5 days. Long fin smelt is a long, slender-bodied fish measuring 12 to 15 centimeters in length. Scales on this species are going to be mostly silver along the sides, but they may also have an olive or pink iridescence along the dorsal side or the back. Long fin smelt can be found in estuaries throughout the northern half of California. They can tolerate salinities ranging from fresh water to nearly pure seawater. They feed primarily on plankton such as copepods, and they move into freshwater to spawn, with the peak breeding season occurring between February and April. Female smelt release an average of 5,000 to 24,000 adhesive eggs. Smelt typically die after spawning, though a few females may survive for another year. The eggs hatch around 40 days, and the larvae are washed downstream into the estuary, where it takes about 30 to 60 days before they morph into juvenile fish. Sacramento Splittail is a large minnow measuring up to 40 centimeters in length. There are two distinct characteristics to this species. The first is the upper lobe of the tail fin, which for this species is larger than the lower lobe. Adults of the species also develop a hump behind their head. Splittail is endemic to California and can only be found in the watersheds of the Central Valley. Splittails are well adapted to estuarine life, and they can tolerate a wide range of salinities. Prey items are frequently bottom-dwelling invertebrates and also detritus. Spawning occurs between late February and early July, and one large female may produce up to 100,000 eggs. Fertilized eggs are going to stick to flooded or emergent vegetation until the embryos hatch in about 3 to 7 days. Hatch time is usually temperature dependent, and active feeding and swim bladder function in larvae begins after 5 to 7 days. The larva is going to remain in the vegetation for 10 to 14 days, where they'll have adequate cover and access to small prey. And then young of the year splittail will move into the estuary between April and August. River lamprey is a small lamprey measuring up to 17 centimeters in length. Adults have a dark back and sides and yellow to silver bellies. The species has large eyes relative to its body, and the teeth from its oral disc are readily visible from the side. The species is known to inhabit estuaries and river systems within California, and this is also a species capable of tolerating a wide range of salinities. River lampreys are parasites, attaching to fish such as salmon and herring and feeding on their muscle tissue. Feeding can even continue after the death of the host. River lampreys return to their natal streams to spawn in February and May, and most early life history information for this species is pretty limited. We don't understand a lot about river lampreys, but we do know that they can produce eggs that range anywhere from 11,000 to 37,000 per deposit per female. Western burrowing owl is a small, brown, mottled owl that stands about 7 to 9 inches in height. True to its name, the burrowing owl nests in a hole in the ground. Although it's quite willing to dig its own burrow, it often uses one that's already provided by prairie dogs, skunks, ground squirrels, or other wildlife. Burrowing owls require habitat with open, well-drained terrain, short, sparse vegetation, and underground burrows. During the breeding season, they may also need enough permanent cover and taller vegetation within their foraging range to provide them with sufficient prey. Because of this, burrowing owls can occupy a wide range of habitats, including grasslands, agricultural areas, urban vacant lots, as well as the margins of airports. Breeding in California can start as early as January and continue through September. The peak of breeding is in April. Burrowing owls can lay anywhere between 1 to 11 eggs. The young hatch in about 30 days and fledge after 45 days. They will remain at the burrow for some time, foraging at night with the adults, until they're ready to fledge on their own. Swainson's hawk is a medium to large-sized hawk with adults getting up to 21 inches in length with 52-inch wingspans. Their plumage is variable, and there are usually two color morphs. The first morph is a light phase, which have dark heads, breastbands, and light bellies, while the dark phase birds are going to be sooty black. Both color phases have bicolored underwings, dark gray flight feathers, lighter wing linings, a broad tail, and long, relatively narrow pointed wings. In March and April, they arrive on breeding grounds in the Solano and Central Valley counties, as well as the interior valleys of the coastal ranges. Breeding habitat includes woodlands, savanna, grasslands, and scattered trees. Swainson's hawk require large tracts of grassland and open land for which to forage. During migration and foraging, they use open lowlands, and these hawks typically occur at elevations from sea level to 1,500 feet. Northern Harrier is a medium-sized raptor that can measure 18 to 20 inches in length with a wingspan of about 43 inches. Adult plumage colors can range from brown to gray, with all birds exhibiting white undersides and a distinctive white rump patch. All individuals are also going to have a flattened owl-like face. Harriers prefer to inhabit wide open areas such as grasslands, rangelands, and open marsh habitats, but they're rarely found in wooded areas. California is home to both migratory and year-long resident populations. Species nest on the ground, often in areas of dense marsh or grassland vegetation, and mating takes place from April to September, with typical clutch size usually ranging from 4 to 5 eggs, with an incubation period of 28 to 36 days. Chicks of this species usually fledge after hatching in about 14 days. White-tailed kite is a medium-sized raptor, 13 to 15 inches in length, with a long white tail, a gray back, and white facial feathers. Adults have red eyes, while juveniles have yellow eyes, and all individuals have a distinctive black spot beneath each wing wrist, in addition to a sharply hooked beak. White-tailed kites may inhabit a wide range of habitats, including savanna, marshes, cultivated lands, desert, and woodlands. This species feeds almost exclusively on small mammals, and in California, white-tailed kites are commonly associated with agricultural lands. They frequently nest on the tops of trees in stands adjacent to open foraging area. Mating takes place from February to October, and clutch size typically ranges from 4 to 5 eggs. With an incubation period of 28 to 32 days, chicks usually fledge after about 38 days. California black rail is a small marsh bird about 4 to 5 inches in length, with a black bill and dark plumage. This species is highly secretive and rarely seen. However, their distinctive call can be heard at night. Black rail can be found almost exclusively in emergent wetland vegetation, most commonly bulrush and pickleweed, and their diet is mainly carnivorous, where they feed on arthropods from the mud or surrounding vegetation. Nests are built in dense marsh vegetation, either on the ground or a few inches above it, and parents will select sites that are generally at the upper limit of the tidal flood zone to prevent their nests from being submerged. Little is known about this species' reproduction. However, nesting is known to occur between mid-March and early June, with clutch sizes ranging from 3 to 8 eggs. Tricolor Blackbird is a medium-sized passerine bird with a conical beak, usually anywhere between 7 to 9 inches long. Male breeding plumage is almost entirely black, but they do carry a distinctive red shoulder patch bordered with white fringe. This species is found throughout the Central Valley and a few coastal environments within and south of Sonoma County. Tricolor blackbirds can be found nesting in freshwater wetland vegetation as well as agricultural fields. Their diet consists primarily of insects and seeds. This species forms the largest nesting colonies of any passerine bird, with a 10-acre area containing between 50 to 20,000 nests. Nests are built in dense vegetation with plenty of cover, and breeding takes place from May to July. Females rear up to 2 broods of 4 chicks per nesting season, and incubation lasts up to 2 weeks, with another 2 weeks required for nestlings to fledge. Loggerhead Shrike is a medium-sized passerine bird with a hooked beak and a relatively large head compared to its body size. Adults are gray, with black masks and white throats. This species is found throughout the foothills and lowlands of California, preferring open country with short vegetation and well-spaced shrubs or low trees. Loggerhead shrikes frequently impale large prey items on thorns or barbed wire. And this behavior creates stores of food in larders for consumption during the winter season. Their diet consists of grasshoppers, beetles, and rodents. However, this species is known to prey on a wide range of animals and can kill and carry prey as massive as itself. Shrikes build nests in dense, thorny vegetation, and females may have up to 2 broods of 5 to 6 eggs per year. Incubation lasts 15 to 17 days, with a 16 to 20-day nestling period. Migratory and nesting birds are a fairly common concern on most California construction projects, and that's because they carry with them a federal and state protection. This applies to most birds in California. In fact, practically all birds in California are protected under these 2 federal and state protections, with the exception of some invasive and non-native species. For the purposes of this project, the nesting season is going to be from February 1st to September 15th, and that means that we anticipate nesting to occur between those 2 dates, although it is possible that nesting could occur sometime outside of them. Birds can use all sorts of structures to build their nests. Some nest directly on the ground, some will use low grasses or shrubs, others will nest in trees, and in some cases birds will use man-made structures to build their nests, in particular swallows, swifts, and other birds that like cliff faces or rocky surfaces. They'll use bridges or the weep holes within bridges to construct their nests and rear their young. These birds can be pretty tolerant to human-induced noise and disturbance, so some are not very deterred by a lot of human activity. So it's important that we get deterrence up to keep these birds away as much as possible. Now we're going to go over some of the general species protection measures associated with this project. So if a listed or regulated species shows up on or near the project site, we'll need to set up a protective radius for it. The radius is a no-work buffer that needs to remain in place until the animal leaves the area. And for this project, all regulated species carry a radius of 100 feet, with the exception of western burrowing owl and California black rail, which require much larger radii. There are several general protective measures that need to be followed on this project. I'll go over these quickly, but you should review these measures in your training materials. Our first section deals with construction fencing. There are 2 types of fencing that should be required on this project. The first is construction barrier fence. This fencing must be used to identify environmentally sensitive areas, or ESAs. It must be 36 inches tall above the soil surface and must have a 1-foot gap between the ground and the bottom of the fence so that wildlife cannot become entrapped. The second type of fencing is garter snake exclusion fence. If suitable habitat for giant garter snake is present on or near the project, 3-foot tall silt fencing buried 4 to 6 inches beneath the ground must be installed. This fence must be in place from May to October, or in any circumstances where snake burrows have collapsed or been excavated. The fencing must enclose the work area to the maximum extent possible. And for all fencing, the fencing must be taut and the stakes must face inward to the project site. Additionally, the fence must be constructed so that wildlife cannot enter the work site during non-working hours. There are quite a few general protection measures with this project. First off, it is your responsibility to maintain and monitor the county's exclusion netting for nesting birds on the site. If there is damage to the netting over the course of the project, you must immediately replace or repair it. Also, any trench or hole deeper than 1 foot needs to be covered at the end of each workday. If covering the trench isn't feasible, then escape ramps need to be installed. These can be made of wood or soil. And these measures help ensure that no wildlife become entrapped on the worksite during non-working hours. Additionally, all pipes, posts, culverts, or similar hollow structures need to be capped, screened, or filled at the end of every workday. This is also to prevent wildlife from entering the equipment and causing problems later on. All fencing posts and signs must have the top 3 post holes covered or filled with screws or bolts to prevent wildlife entrapment, and this is especially important for raptors that might perch on the posts and have their claws or talons trapped in the post holes. Any wildlife encountered during the course of the project must be allowed to leave unharmed, preferably on its own volition. This includes regulated and non-regulated species. Finally, all trash needs to be disposed of in animal-proof containers and removed at a minimum once a week. This is especially important because opportunistic predators that are attracted to accumulated garbage can also present problems for regulated wildlife in the surrounding area. Because this project is in close proximity to a waterway, erosion control measures need to be in place to protect wildlife in and around the stream. First and foremost, you need to ensure that all appropriate BMPs are installed and maintained on the project site. Do not use equipment with leaks, and if you need to perform maintenance on a vehicle, it needs to be done at least 300 feet from wetlands or drainages. Turbid water generated from dewatering needs to be filtered with a filter bag and diverted to either settling tank or an infiltration area. Also, all inactive construction areas that have been inactive for 10 days or more need to be covered or stabilized with a non-toxic binder to prevent potential discharge. And finally, all loose material stockpiles need to be covered and contained with filter fabric fence and dikes. Stockpiles should always be out of the way of traffic areas and drainage channels. Because this project involves pile driving, several precautions need to be taken to protect regulated fish species. To begin, the in-water work window for the first construction season will be limited from July 21st to October 31st. The following season, the work window will be restricted to August 1st to the end of October 31st. Pile driving must implement the following protection measures. A bubble curtain must be in place around the impacted piles to dampen underwater noise. Additionally, before pile driving starts in earnest, several dead blows must be conducted to flush fish from the surrounding area. Vibratory driving should be used as much as possible before using an impact hammer, and pile driving will also be limited to 2 piles per day or 2,000 strikes per day, whichever comes first. Impact driving is also limited to 24 days total during construction, with no night driving permitted. Construction in the stream should not produce sound that results in unauthorized fish take. This applies to any in-water activities, including pile driving. During any dewatering activities, fish exclusion materials need to be installed around all piles and casings, and the biologist will need to remove as many fish as possible before cofferdam or water bypasses can be installed. As the work area is gradually dewatered, the biologist will relocate any remaining fish in the work area. So we'll finish up here with some important takeaways from this presentation. First and foremost, don't touch or approach any regulated species. Notify your biological monitor immediately if you see something that might be listed or regulated. We anticipate active bird nests to be found on this project site anywhere between February 1st and September 15th. As always, stay within the designated construction zone and report all incidents to your biological monitor and to your supervisor. No hazardous waste, pollutants, or debris can be permitted to enter the water bodies. And that goes hand in hand with maintaining your BMPs and adhering to the plaque requirements to prevent erosion and sediment loss. And last and most importantly, you and your company are wholly responsible for following the measures stated in the plaques and following the guidance of this Biological Resources Information Program. I appreciate you following along with this presentation. If you have any questions about what's been covered in this presentation, your training materials, permits, project specifications, please direct them to your on-site alluvian biologist.